Greetings. This is Kalehoff from Syncapse, and welcome to our presentation today, The Value of a Facebook Fan 2013, Revisiting Brand Currency in Social Media. We are going to get started now, and what I'd like to do first of all is just cover a couple quick housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat box to the right of your webcast, webcast software, or you can tweet them to at Syncapse using the hashtag social data. And this webcast will be recorded, so we will post the recording probably by the end of the week. And we'll send an email with an alert to all of our signups at that time. So why don't we get started? So again, I'm Kalehoff, and my role at Syncapse is VP of Product Marketing. And we having an awesome time here studying social and building software and infrastructure for many of the world's largest consumer brand marketers. And so our perspective today certainly comes from the lens of a very large consumer brand marketer. So I want to give a little bit of context about this presentation. It's really based on a seminal research report series called The Value of a Brand Fan. And we're going to go into some of the methodology in a minute, but I think what's important is the context. So if you look back to 2011, we had this sort of thematic idea on social that social is a hobby. So people thought of it as chaotic, reactive, consumers in control, disconnected silos. You might have social being played out in the PR team or the brand team or the advertising team or pieces of it in HR or legal. But the fact is that pieces of it were everywhere and they were disconnected. In 2011, you also had the dominance of the social networks driving conversation around what KPIs really matter. We're coming off a tidal wave of hype around the like or the follow. But who follows and likes really matter. They might be a means to an end, but if one thing is uncertain, it's that the social networks have tried to dictate what metrics are important. Next, we have community management. Community managers are awesome. They're very important to the relationship with consumers and brands across social media. However, community management should not be driving probably the entire social strategy, considering how critical and how much of an impact it has on different business functions. 2011 was also, we see as the year of false friendships. We had a lot of activities around simply gaining friends or gaining followers without any sort of meaningful integrity. And we also had frankly, a real disconnect with sales. Social did not have a measurable connection to sales. But that was 2011. Let's talk about 2013. So if you look at this year, we look at 2013 as the year of social business. This is the year where social is becoming synchronized. We're getting processes put in place. This is the year where brands set the direction around social, not consumers. If anything, consumers co-create with brands. We also have social becoming connected and integrated. We have standard measures that the organization across different functions are all working toward. Corporate social marketing goals, so there's not inconsistency across efforts and across investments. We have brand-led KPIs. For the first time, we're really having brands take a hard look and connect minute social data and connect them up the value chain to meaningful corporate brand KPIs. We're using social to create unprecedented consumer segmentation models. And we're coming of an age of genuine communication. And And frankly, to be social means you're open for business. If you're a business and you don't have a social presence, chances are it will give the perception that you're, frankly, closed for business. So 2011 versus 2013, we see social maturing, and that's really sort of the theme. And as social matures, it means answering some of the tougher questions. And working across with some of the world's largest brands, from the CMOs to the heads of digital to the sort of market and regional leaders, probably the biggest question that we get to help solve is to help understand what is the value of a Facebook fan. And you can really think of this, in social networks, membership, whether it be becoming a fan, or on Twitter if it becomes a follow. Social membership is really sort of the foundation, the glue of building a presence on social. So what is that actually worth? And so that is really the key question that we're going to probe today during this presentation. So next, what we'd like to do is go a little bit into the research and our process around creating this new model. So the report that we did, The Value of a Facebook Fan, was really the sequel to a 2010 report where we innovated a new composite metric and methodology to understand the value of social membership. So the nature of that really had to do with understanding economic drivers of customers, of brands, and splitting and probing into two groups, one being fans and one being non-fans among a brand's customer group. And what we really wanted to do is not only look at the value and the comparison of fans versus non-fans, but to surface some insights and some more generalized brand mandates, which we're going to present to you today. And then finally, we're going to touch upon 20 of the largest global consumer brands as proof points throughout this research. Now, before we dive into the findings, which we're about to do head first, but I would like to give a little bit of detail about the methodology. And I underscore that we are entirely transparent. There's no black boxes here, and we are very open to feedback, both for sort of validation as well as improvement of our method. And certainly in the 2013 Value of Fan study that we conducted in the first quarter of this year, we certainly made some improvements over the initial study and expanded and deepened to cover some key aspects to be able to compare and contrast among when we're looking at fans. So the methodology is really based around looking at fans versus non-fans of a brand and applying a composite index or a composite value, which comprises 6 key drivers of economic value. So if you look at product spending, and this has to do with the spending habits that fans and non-fans have on brands and consumer categories. We also looked at loyalty. What is the intention to keep purchasing the brand in the future? We also looked at advocacy. So we applied the Net Promoter Score and included it in the weighting of value. We also looked at the media value. When you gain a social membership, you tend to gain efficiencies of earned reach and frequency when you communicate within your social graph. So we incorporated that into our value. Social memberships also tend to organically grow memberships. Birds of a feather flock together. When you grow a sizable mass of consumers as fans toward a brand, they tend to organically breed more fans. So we included that as well. And then finally, we took a look at brand affinity and some of the emotional drivers that fans have toward their brand. So these are the 6 core dimensions of our study. And what I'd like to do now is to go into some of the key findings. So the first key finding is that if you look at the value of a fan in 2013 versus 2014, we saw fan value increase. When we applied our actual composite metric, we identified that the average of the 20 major brands that we focused on in our study was $174. And what's probably more important than the actual $174 is the increase versus 3 years ago, which was a 28% increase. And so we thought that was pretty significant. And another interesting sort of phenomenon within that time period is that we saw fan counts double or sometimes triple in the time span that we looked at. So even though we had a sort of a mass generalization of fans of consumer brands, we still saw the value increase. And one of our theories around this is twofold. First of all, we think that 3 years ago, when Facebook was more of an earlier adopter platform, still very large, but certainly more in the early adopter category versus today, you had perhaps less of the core audience or the core purchasers or the core customers of these brands included in the social memberships. But as Facebook's overall fan base generalized, you had more of the sort of mass consumer brand customers enter the fray and become and have the opportunity to become fans of the brand. And then secondly, certainly many of these brands also became much savvier in their Facebook marketing in the 3-year time period. So many created various promotions or frankly enticing experiences within Facebook which were able to lure core customer segments. And so those are some of our thinking around the increase in the average fan value. So the next key finding we'd like to look at is the variation of fan values. And really what this does is show some of the differences in niche versus mass brands. So what we saw is that brands with smaller retail prices tend to have smaller average fan values. So if you think of, for example, beverages, or confectionery products, they'll tend to have lower consideration, high frequency purchase cycles, lower price, and they'll tend to have lower average values, which is certainly understandable. Then on the other hand, you'll have some other categories. For example, Zara, the fashion brand, and or Levi's, and you'll sometimes some of those niche brands will have much more passionate purchasing behaviors associated with them. So it was certainly a big trend that we saw, and so you can certainly see a variation among fan value. But what's key, though, is that even though you might look at Coca-Cola, which has a lower average fan value of around $70, and while that's a relatively lower average, we look at that and still think it's incredibly significant because if you look at the size of that social membership base at over 60 million, that's really significant. That's a huge audience, and you can sort of you could take the social membership and really kind of multiply that by the average fan value, and then start to get an idea of the scale of the value of that social membership. So the next key finding, what we're going to look at is behavior and some key things that we saw. So users of brands just frankly tend to be more receptive to brands. So if you're a fan, you'll be much more receptive. So for example, 80% of brand fans are more likely to be actual users. So secondly is that 43% more spent in respective categories versus non-fans, despite having a higher income. And we thought that was particularly interesting. So if you're a fan of a brand, almost half are, you're going to spend even more in that entire category. And if you have a lower income, less money to spend, just showing that your self-identification as being a fan means you're just going to disproportionately spend more money, both either with the brand or with the brand and its competitors. Fans tend to be much more satisfied with the brands that they use, and they tend to be much more likely to continue using the brands in the future versus non-fans who are also customers of the brand. So I think a key mandate that comes out of this is that when you're out doing your social marketing planning and investment, one of the top priorities, if not the most important thing you should be directing marketing dollars toward, is converting users to fans. So convert your existing customers into fans, because it gives them an opportunity to reinforce messaging to the audience that's frankly most likely to be receptive and to amplify their good experience. And so it really sort of has a halo effect of positivity. And so, when you're thinking about your targeting, you're going to target, new customers or existing customers. I think this just underscores that you really want to prioritize your existing customers in converting them into fans and then messaging to them because of the extraordinarily higher impact that you're going to get on your subsequent marketing investment. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this prioritization, because there's much more evidence that just suggests that you should be investing in that order. So next we want to look at brand preferences and attitudes of fans versus non-fans. And the umbrella finding here is that brand fans are super consumers. And it is intuitive that if you fan a brand, you're going to be more, a probably higher quality customer. But we wanted to put some actual metrics around that and give some context. So in terms of fans versus non-fans, fans spend almost double the hours on Facebook per week. They 42% versus 15% rate the importance of social media very high. That's the importance of social media in their life. And in terms of the ways in which social media is important, 39% of fans say it's to research products that they're considering purchasing, and that's versus 14% of non-fans. Much more of the fans are using social media to share information with others, and about three times as many fans versus non-fans use social media to connect with the brands that they like. So, while this helps validate your investment in creating fans, I think it also again validates why you want to prioritize converting your existing customers into fans, and then because you really get the sort of halo effect of this very engaged audience here. So the next finding is around attitudes. Is around spending. So what we looked at in this chart is the spending patterns of fans versus non-fans, and particularly in niche categories, you tend to see an extraordinary difference. So, for example, with Zara, which is one of the most raging, even though it's a niche brand, it's a raging fan base, you'll see roughly double the actual spending activity occur. Same thing for H&M, same thing for Levi's. Even McDonald's, you see a much higher level of spending among fans versus non-fans. And where you see a lesser difference tends to be around the categories of products that have lower cost and higher purchase frequency, lower consideration. So brands like Skittles or Dr. Pepper. So, but there certainly are some disparities here. But one of the mandates that we think is important here, and we're looking at sort of extremes of fans versus non-fans, but within the actual sort of criteria of spending, it's a great way to actually score and prioritize, and it doesn't. Your scoring and your prioritization does not have to be binary of fans versus non-fans. You can even look within your fan base and then score them based off of spending and create different segments within your fan base in order to reach them or communicate them in more tailored ways. And if you think about a car brand which may have a range of prices in its models, you may do a segmentation to communicate in a more relevant way to different spending segments. So the next thing we want to look at here is around advocacy. And as I mentioned earlier, we included the Net Promoter Score as a core metric in our fan value composite index. But what we did is we actually opened up our research into a range of metrics and attitudes around that are related to advocacy. So a couple of the highlights is that the likelihood to recommend. 85% of fans of a brand are likely to recommend versus 60% for non-fans. Fans have a much greater impression. They're 88% of fans are likely to purchase in the future versus 60%. And then among current users of the brand, the overall satisfaction is just much higher, and the likelihood to continue using is much higher. So again, underscoring that if you're looking at advocacy, willingness to, propensity to recommend, there's a huge difference between fans and non-fans. So if you think about, well, how would you apply this? Then, one way is, we believe you really need to think about kind of getting in the weeds and in the trenches with your customers. You need to interact firsthand with your fans and your customers, understand what they're passionate about, convert them into fans, solicit their input, because that's frankly one of the best ways to create the shareable experiences. On the flip side, and we see a lot of even very large marketers get tempted and make this mistake, is they will prioritize a quest to hunt down and somehow communicate and influence the influencers. The fact is that most sort of created influencer groups are highly elusive, and they tend to be the types of people who are unfamiliar with your brand. They tend to have no vested interest, and they tend to be very skeptical. And those people are the most difficult to convert and probably will have the lowest return on your marketing dollar. So the next area of the research that I'd like to go over is around emotional drivers. And what we saw here is that brands that have longevity, and we mean brands that you think of as ubiquitous and have been around for a really long time and have become really common, tend to have lower fan value. And Coca-Cola is probably one of the best examples of that. Everybody knows Coke. It's been around forever. It's become, in many ways, a sort of subtle part of your life for many people. It's not Coca-Cola, many of its other sort of sub-brands. So that's certainly something that we saw. We also saw a trend where polarizing brand profiles would attract higher fan values. And an example of this might be BlackBerry, where BlackBerry is a brand where customers either love it or they often will dislike it. And if a customer dislikes the brand or is indifferent to it, that customer will tend to not opt into social membership. Conversely, with that type of polarizing brand, you'll tend to attract the very, very passionate, die-hard loyalists. And that's certainly something that we've seen with BlackBerry. Now, one interesting brand in terms of its personality drivers was Walmart, and Walmart's an extremely polarizing brand, and it has it also has very high usage of non-fans. And if you think about Walmart, there might be a lot of people who are not necessarily in love with, or less than in love with the brand, but use the service in the store because of other reasons, whether the attractive prices or the geographic convenience. And so we certainly saw that pop up in the research. So we see very high usage among non-fans, but we also see, again, a polarizing brand tends to produce some very positive fans. So we saw very high scores for the fans that were members of the Walmart Facebook presence. Next is we'd like to talk about why people become a fan, and we're gonna actually go a little bit deeper on this. But I think what's foremost important to note is that being a user of the brand is really a prerequisite to becoming a fan or to like a brand's Facebook page. So on average, 80% of fans were already users of the brand. So again, I keep coming back to this, but in terms of your planning on Facebook, your investments, probably the most important thing you can do is to convert your existing users and build off of that base. And then moreover, I think another way to think about the importance of once you do convert those existing users into fans is that what that asset really represents is a very high quality membership base, which you can do a number of things with. First of all, they tend to be much more likely to participate and return value on word of mouth marketing promotions. They like to share those experiences. As the earlier research indicated, they have very high advocacy rates. But another area which I'm surprised we don't see a lot more of this among leading marketers, but when you create a high quality fan membership that is devoid of noise and cheaply acquired fans, it presents an incredible opportunity for surfacing new consumer segments and performing lookalike modeling. So one thing, one common practice that we'll do with large brands is to help them understand their customer base and convert their existing customers, create that really high membership base, perform a number of segmentations in order to understand what content or what experiences motivate those different consumer segments within that overall base. And then we'll use various tools to create lookalike models and then apply those lookalike profiles to paid media, which enables us to gain incredible scale for both acquiring and communicating to the best prospects and customers. The next slide I want to show you here is sort of the second layer on becoming a fan. So we first iterated that becoming a fan is a prerequisite. I'm sorry, being a customer is a prerequisite to becoming a fan. But there's a couple key drivers that sort of play into psychology. One is that direct response works. If you offer a coupon or you offer some sort of free service or a discount or a purchase reward, those are very sort of practical, sort of logical, enticing incentives, and they work. And that is one of the two major drivers of becoming a fan of a brand. However, almost equally as powerful and we're about to come out with another report on going deeper into this topic, but almost equally as powerful as direct response incentives is brand affinity. The second top reason that consumers become a fan of a brand is to show their support and to express themselves through the emotional attributes of the brand. So we think this really, you need to take these two top drivers and kind of put them in context. And if you're going to think how would you apply that? What we would recommend is to, in a fan acquisition context where you're trying to get fans, you want to probably lower the emphasis on couponing and direct response. And if you do use those, you want to make sure that your targeting is very precise. And then instead, you want to emphasize the emotional and expressional attributes of the brand and rely on that more so. And then once you gain your fan membership, then using couponing is a great way to sort of sustain and remind consumers when to buy. And it's particularly a good tactic with those lower priced products, lower consideration products that are sort of very ubiquitous, where you need to be sort of reminded of the presence. So direct response, top driver of becoming a fan. Emotional and expression is the second reason. But if you're a brand investing for fan acquisition, we would say flip the priority and the emphasis of those two drivers when you're doing your fan acquisition, because you want to get those high quality fans that are fanning you because they love you, and then use those direct response methods in order to sustain the proper reach and frequency to keep the sales momentum happening. Now, finally, summary of the research here and how we would kind of contextualize it at a high level is, one, I think fans matter. There's a lot of hype, and there's in some areas of the marketing industry, frankly some scrutiny that happens, and certainly when many marketers walk into the CFO's office or the CEO's office, that big investment in Facebook, what is the value of it? What's the payoff? And what I hope is that our research proves that this is a self-identifying audience that is high quality. And if anything, it is a self-identifying segment that becomes a very, very powerful asset which brands can use. Which takes me to my second point, is that because of the powerful nature of the consumer segmentation data, we believe that social should have a seat at the center of marketing strategy. We even have some global consumer entertainment clients which have frankly rebuilt their CRM databases using social profile data and social consumer segmentation data because of the precision and the granularity that social profile data offer. And of course, there's many social marketing tactics like advertising and whatnot, but we think at the core, the segmentation ability around the data is very, very powerful. And I think the third thing that comes out of this is that we live in a pay-to-play world. Facebook is a media company. They sell advertising, and that's how they make their money. And while that can there could be a downside to that in some ways. It's become EdgeRank has made it more difficult to achieve organic reach. On the other hand, we think it's a very positive development that Facebook and other social networks are actually becoming real media companies, and the reason is that when you put a premium or a price on a consumer, a number of things happen. One, you tend to create more sort of precision and across many dimensions. You begin to remove some of the spam and some of the some of the undesirable advertisers who may participate in a media channel. And you certainly saw this happen with Google and some of the other early advertising networks. But this also means that the bar is being raised in terms of consumer insight, data, and targeting. So, does lower organic reach matter if you're more capable, if you become more capable of targeting the right consumer at the right time in the right context? And frankly, I'd say that the precision in the long run is probably a pretty compelling argument. And so it's a pay-to-play world, and paying means a couple of things. It means that within your organization, you have to invest in the talent and the fluency and the infrastructure in order to handle social data and to act on it. And from a more tactical level, it means, if you want to be on the Facebook wall, are probably going to have to pay for it to achieve the reach and frankly justify all the other social investments that you make. You create a lot of great content. It's wasteful if you don't pay to put it in front of the right people at the right time in the right context. And so there's a number of questions here, and I'm actually going to begin to go through them and answer them. And please do pose your questions. What I'd like to do while you're putting in your questions is go through a very, very quick case study, looking at an example of how we've applied the value of a brand fan to an actual marketing program. And so please enter your questions, and while you're doing that, I'll go through a very quick case study, and then we'll get to the questions. Okay, so here's our quick case study. We'll go through. So using the value of a brand fan construct, how do you harness that value for better marketing? And so I'd like to show you this quick case study, and it starts with insight planning deliverable. So using the fan data, you can create better marketing projections, you can understand the consumer, and create better consumer segments. So our example is actually a real example of one of the world's largest cosmetics companies. And what we did is we first used from the brand fan model, we created a consumer segmentation, and we in fact identified 140 micro-targets in which to prioritize and to become the foundation of our planning. So it enabled us to plot spend, it enabled us to create a better communication plan, it enabled us to set the benchmarks over reach and frequency. So then what we did is we applied the brand fan model to actual execution. And this is actually a paid media example. And so using those 140 segments that we identified as being very important, we then worked with the various creative assets from this cosmetics company to create 4,000 variations, which we then delivered against those 140 micro-target consumer segments. And the result of that, and this is very common, in over 75% of cases, when we apply this approach, what we tend to see is a radical shift in the actual media efficiency against the plotted targets. And then comes the measurement. So applying again the same model of looking at a brand fan, we then tracked in real time the results against these 140 segments. And then we immediately applied them through that advertising model. We applied it back into the owned and earned components of the social program to continually improve those results in a continuous cycle. And the result, beyond the sort of tactical outcome, was really a shift in how this cosmetics company began to look at the power of social marketing. So it enabled sort of a radical departure from mass marketing to segmented marketing to very individualized marketing because after we got this 140 microsegments, the sort of real-time integration of the paid owned and earned media enabled us to surface real consumer interactions at scale, which became very, very, very powerful learnings for a brand which typically does not have direct interactions with their consumers because they tend to happen through retailers. So that takes us to the marketing attribution component. And so at the end of the day, the objective was to really achieve better reach and frequency with high relevance, reaching the right people. And the result that we were looking for was, from a brand perspective, the brand KPIs, awareness, recall, trial, and then actually, not only communicating to existing customers, but finding new ones. So the paid media played a big role in expanding the actual fan base and to discover new highly engaged customer segments. And just some of the actual results here. So very efficiently on a low media budget, we surpassed the total impression numbers within that estimated frequency of over 5 over the time period. This was over a quarter, and there was a fan acquisition component involved here, so converting existing customers into fans. So in this quarter, a fairly significant growth in the membership, which became a much stronger foundation for ongoing communications. And then, again, going back to the brand fan valuation model, we were able to identify the lift in spending among fans versus non-fans. We were able to identify the loyalty value of the new consumers we brought into this segment, and it came out to real dollars, and we were able to put a real value on that, which the brand is able to take back and to justify the expenditure and to direct toward future planning. And then these are all the brands that were involved in this cosmetics category. So we were also able to do some benchmarking as well, which will be looked at on an ongoing basis. And so this really kind of underscores sort of a full closed-loop marketing cycle of using social data, profile data, for planning, for execution, measurement, and finally your sort of overall attribution and understanding. And so that takes us to the end of our brief little case study, but I wanted to show that there's real practical application with the fan valuation model. And what I'd like to do now is just begin to address some of your questions, and I'm going to be scrolling up here. And the first question is there any way to turn off the beeps? So I do apologize for the beeps. Hopefully we've taken care of them by now. So one question is, how do we conduct this survey with fans and non-fans, and so kind of a little deeper on the methodology there. So first of all, what we did is we tapped into a North American consumer sample of about 100,000 people, and this was in partnership with Hotspecs, which is a well-regarded research and polling firm, with a lot of experience in consumer packaged goods. So they actually conducted the survey for us, and then we applied the raw data to our model. And so what we did is we screened that 100,000 consumer base to identify customers of the brands that we identified in our study. And we picked the brands that we did because they were high-performing sort of category leaders. And so we wanted to, really kind of focus on brands that, were doing it right and had real mass appeal and great scale. And within that base of customers, we would then identify fans versus non-fans. And in order to fortify the actual participation among fans, one little trick we did was to develop a survey application that can be dropped into a brand's Facebook page, and so we can promote the research, the study among an actual brand's fan base. And that's also a very beneficial method because it enables us to ask permission for Facebook allow data, which gives us a lot of valuable access to consumer profile information on an aggregate basis that we can use to better understand and probe deeper into the motivations and attitudes from a behavioral standpoint. One question, is the fan value equivalent to lifetime customer value or the incremental value of Facebook relationship? So our study was really based on looking at fans versus non-fans, and the value is really set within a one-year period at a sort of point in time representing a one-year period. So our survey questions, which solicited the data, which we applied to our composite formula, asked questions like, what was your purchase behavior over the last 12 months, or the question would differ for the type of brand because you use them in different ways, but the questionnaire was designed around spending over the prior year, the 12 months, and what is intended spending for the upcoming 12 months. And so that was really kind of the parameter, is this with 1 year of history, then looking out within the next year, and that's sort of the construct for time. So will this presentation be downloadable? Yes, it's on our website. If you go to syncapse.com, you can download it from our homepage. You'll see that there's a slider on our homepage which features the research. And for additional questions on the formula and the value, you can actually download the white paper and get the specifics. Question on do smaller retailers have smaller fan values? Are you measuring actual sales? So we were measuring self-reported sales numbers, and we did this for a couple reasons. I mean, one, it gives us sort of an average way to look across a wide variety of brands in one single study, and also it's really sort of was the only economically feasible way to conduct this research, using self-reported data in that manner. However, we often conduct these studies for individual brands where we'll enrich the study with actual spending behavior and actual CRM data from the brands. So on very specific client deployments of the value of fan study, we do go into actual behavioral spending data versus self-reported survey data. But we're pretty confident that on a sort of relative and average basis, it gives us good directional indicators of where things are heading. Does fan value equate to increased revenue for the brand as we increase our Facebook fans? So average fan value does tend to equate to increased revenue, and the reason, at least within the context of our research, past spending and intended future spending were the highest weighted attributes within our study. So if you had a higher fan value, you inherently do spend more and intend to spend more. But as I underscored with the Coke example, Coke had one of the lower average fan values. But if you look at the size of its social membership at over 60 million, 60 million multiplied by the $70 average fan value, you can come up with a kind of a ballpark of what your fan membership is worth. I think what's also important though is that we applied the same weightings in our brand fan valuation model across every brand. If you're an individual brand, it might be very worthwhile to adjust the weightings depending on the type of product or service that you have. And that's very typical with our sort of custom deployments of the study, is that we'll work with the brand to understand their internal KPIs, and we'll adjust weightings to achieve results and insights that are going to have be most relevant and have the greatest value for impacting the business. Let's see. What is the average break-even point from the client? Really what you need to do is to look at, frankly, the cost of acquiring fans as well as the cost of maintaining them. And that's something that's done on an average basis. But so there's no real kind of catch-all average number I could tell you. But I think this valuation model gives you a good place to start in which to create your own ROI model. See a few more questions here on retailers. One thing about retailers, they're a little bit different than actual brands. So if you're Coca-Cola, people purchase Coca-Cola. Conversely, people do not purchase Walmart. They spend at Walmart to purchase other brands. There are a few questions around retail here, but I think that's an important differentiation between brands and actual retailers. But that said, the model still works for retail brands. Looking down our questions here, a lot of questions about the math and the components, and I would again just encourage you to download the actual study. So the question about the NPS score, which we incorporated. So is this based on the actual NPS of the brand or some other method? So our incorporation of the NPS method is that we ask the question, would you recommend this brand or service to a friend or a colleague, and then a 0 to 10 point scale. So it was fairly true to the Net Promoter Score method developed by Fred Reichelt. So we did that. So we do that in this study so that not only to help influence the composite value metric, but it becomes an interesting number in which to perform some comparative analysis. So, for example, there are some brands where the likelihood to recommend is just as high for non-fans versus fans. So you can do those sorts of analyses based on potential to advocate. So the question here, it is expected that Facebook fans of a brand have a more favorable attitude towards the brand and spend more within the brand. This is why we became their fan on Facebook in the first place. They didn't develop the brand attitude and spend behavior because they became a fan, correct? That's a very good question. This is, I think, the crux of the question is cause and correlation. And this was not a causational study, so we are not implying anywhere in the study that that because you had a Facebook page, people became more valuable. What we are saying is that Facebook fans are inherently more valuable for a host of reasons, and there's all kinds of nuances to their personalities and their profiles that you can apply to do better marketing. So we are not drawing any type of correlation here. However, we did ask a number of questions in our research about the impact of advertising and messaging, and we are going to come out with some research in the next few months surfacing some of those findings. And the last thing I'll follow up with on this question of correlation and causation is that we do often conduct periodic fan value sort of update studies in order to better get to that answer of causation. So, so that is something that is important, but it's an answer that you get to by conducting a subsequent brand tracking program. So somebody asked, what about influencers outside of the fan base, and what about within? So again, this is something we touched upon a little bit, but you want to look at your existing customers as your biggest influencers, and then by converting them into fans, you gain a whole lot of insight into a subset of your customer base. And within your fan base, you can do all sorts of different segmentations because you gain a lot of important data about them. You can identify which ones engage. You can identify various demographical attributes when you gain access to their Facebook Allow data or other profile data that's attainable through social networks. So, I think the important thing is, yes, there are influencers outside and inside. The important thing is to prioritize them, and we believe your existing customers converted into fans create the ultimate prioritized influencer database, the ones that really love you and use you and are most likely to have good experiences and listen to you and advocate. And once you take care of those guys, then yes, it makes sense to go outside. Somebody asked, is purchase intent based on information from the brand or from some research done by Syncapse? In this study, the purchase intent was based upon self-reported data in our research. So we thought it was just an economically viable way and comparable way across the different brands we looked at. And I'll say again, within an actual individual deployment of the study with a brand, we'll often use other methods to gather intent, including historical modeling. So somebody asked here about Subway. It's a polarizing brand. Could I explain? And I do have to admit here that there was an arrow on the Subway slide, and what that was an actual mutation of my presentation slide by our webcast software. So it actually looks like the arrow should have been pointing to Walmart, so I apologize for that, and we'll check into that for any future deployments of this slide on the software. So another question is, can you talk how brands might determine the value of their own fans? Yeah, come see me afterward. I have my email at the bottom left. Also, read our study in depth. There's a lot of, I think, practical methods in there that a brand can use on its own. Any thoughts about how these findings would translate to less retail-oriented brands like insurance companies or financial services companies? That's a good question. This model is really about membership, and it's a membership valuation model, and it's applicable to any type of industry. We just happen to be focused on CPG in this study, mainly CPG in this study. But it's applicable to any type of membership in any industry. And our focus was on Facebook. However, you could apply this study to any other type of social membership, whether it be Twitter or LinkedIn. So it's certainly transferable. Question on nonprofits and how to convert fans to donors. And I can certainly imagine that that's a big issue, is that people love to fan and like nonprofits, but when it comes to converting them to actual donors, it's tough. I'd have to look more into the individual case, but I would say that most important is converting your existing donors into fans versus converting fans into customers. I would say that's based on our research and our experience working with for-profit marketers. That is exactly where you need to start. So see if you can first start by getting all your existing donors converted over, because that becomes a very powerful base in which to grow, versus taking your wide universe of somewhat randomized fans and then converting them. And nonprofit is probably a particularly fickle category, because it is one of those categories that can tend to be lend itself to a high fandom and sort of low customer usage. if you think about exotic cars like a Ferrari, Ferrari is a great example where you have a high number of fans, but few of those fans will actually be customers. So there's some real passion brands where you'll see that sort of nuance, and you need to work around that. I'm going to take just one or two more questions, and then I'll be glad to take any questions via email, which is listed there on the slide now. Is it possible to get this type of info for this information for people that follow Brand on Twitter? Can you compare the size across social platforms? Again, I think I just answered that question, but yes, you can certainly apply this model. I'm not sure that it exists. Maybe it does, but you could certainly apply this model. And moreover, we did in this wave of research look at some of the cross-social network behaviors. And what we found is that fans of brands are very receptive to brand communication on networks beyond Facebook. So it just underscores that you need to consider more than just Facebook in order to hit your reach and frequency targets to a specific core group of customers. And they want to hear from you in more places than just on Facebook. And the logic makes sense, but I think it just underscores that you need to think of sort of cross-media cross-network optimization when planning your social marketing programs. So we're at an hour now, but I am honored by the participation and passion in your questions. And there's a number here that I was not able to get to. I apologize, but if you could send me an email, we'll follow up with everyone individually. And as my colleague Ashley has just posted at the bottom of our chat, you can download the full report for free on our website. And if you have any questions or feedback, we most certainly are interested. And final note here is that we will be sending a video archive of this presentation. So give us a few days, and we'll be sure to email it to you all. So with that, thank you, and have a great rest of your week. And we'll look forward to the next presentation.